Hello again from southeastern Finland in northern Europe. I continue my series of historical videos. One of the motivations, of course, is that on September the 1st, 2019, we will mark the 80th anniversary of the start of the Second World War in Europe. In Asia, of course, it had started already back in July 1937 with the start of the Second Chinese-Japanese War when Japan had invaded eastern China. But in Europe, officially it started on the morning of September the 1st, 1939, when the German army, or rather armies, invaded Poland. We know the result. Despite offering valiant resistance to the German invasion and to a smaller extent to the Slovak and Soviet invasions, Poland was occupied in 5 weeks. In fact, in about 3 weeks, most of Poland had already been occupied. Poland was partitioned, and the partition line closely resembled the eastern border of Poland after the Second World War. Germany directly annexed those parts of Poland which it had lost as a result of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Then the rest of Poland occupied by Germany was organized into the so-called general government, which the brutal Nazi German lawyer Dr. Hans Frank administered from Krakow, a large city in southern Poland. So Poland's capital, Warsaw, was not given the status of a capital in the general government. This meant, and then eastern Poland was annexed by the Soviet Union. There were rigged elections where, of course, only the communist candidates were allowed to participate for the so-called People's Assemblies of Belarus or Bielorussia, meaning White Russia, and of the Ukraine during the period between the First and Second World Wars. Western Belarus and Western Ukraine had belonged to Poland. And then after these rigged elections, those dummy assemblies, to quote a historical book, which I read years ago in Finland, then appealed for the right to join the Soviet Socialist Republics of Bielorussia and the Ukraine, which permission was granted. In both halves of Poland, the repression, often violent and brutal repression, and then discrimination against the Poles and then ethnic minorities such as Jews and Romanis or Gypsies began. So also began the systematic imprisonment, torture, and destruction of the Polish leadership. Because both the Nazi Germans and the Soviet communists, or at least their leaders, wanted to subjugate Poland. And indeed, they knew that the so-called non-aggression pact, which had been signed just 9 days before the invasion of Poland started, that is on August the 23rd, 1939 in Moscow, by the Soviet and German foreign ministers, Mr. Vyacheslav Molotov and Mr. Joachim von Ribbentrop, that they were simply buying time, and they would then have a showdown in Eastern Europe. The winner would control at least most of the continental European countries, more or less directly. Both the Nazi German dictator Adolf Hitler and the Soviet communist dictator Joseph Joseph Stalin had designs to dominate not just Europe, but several countries outside Europe. And of course, we have to remember that the former Soviet Union and today's Russia both are transcontinental countries whose relatively small western part is located in Eastern Europe, and the huge Asian eastern part is located in Asia. Western, central, northern, and eastern Asia. Poland had refused to agree either to the German demands to surrender, although Poland did not officially own the free city of Danzig, it had such privileges as transportation rights, because a great majority of Poland's foreign trade went through the port of Danzig. It also had the right to maintain customs officials, and it had a right to maintain that small but important military garrison in Westerplatte, a site just outside Danzig on the coast. And then it had the right to maintain a Polish post office. Poland also had refused Germany's demands, at first requests to allow the German workers to build a highway and a railway across the Polish corridor, that narrow land region which allowed Poland, that small coast on the Baltic Sea's southern shore, and which cut East Prussia off the rest of Germany and made it into a German exclave. Poland also had refused in the summer of 1939 the Soviet demands or requests for the Soviet army's right to enter eastern Poland for defensive purposes in case Poland and the Soviet Union were threatened by an invasion from Germany. The Polish government, which was composed partly of army officers, such as Colonel Józef Beck, who was the foreign minister and, in fact, the most important minister, more important than the prime minister at the time, at the same time tried to resist the German demands for the return of Danzig and the construction of those ex-territorial transportation lines across the Polish corridor, meaning the highway and the railway would have belonged to Germany, and the Soviet demands for the Soviet army's right to enter eastern Poland for defensive purposes, because they feared that accepting either one of these two sets of demands would basically reduce Poland to a client state, which no longer would have been fully independent. They knew that both the Nazi German and the Soviet communist leaders had designs to carve up at least major portions of Poland, and annex them into their countries. Poland was located some 200 kilometers to the east of its current position, and Poland was about 20% larger in area compared to its current area. So Poland had finally begun to mobilize its armed forces on August 30th, 1939, so 1 week after the German-Soviet non-aggression pact or treaty had been signed in Moscow. There had been a temporary halt to the mobilization when Poland's British and French allies had pressed the Polish government for a final set of negotiations with Germany. However, since Poland did not send any representative to Berlin, Germany's capital, with the full authority to sign an agreement, not even the Polish ambassador to Germany, Mr. Józef Lipski, had this authority, the negotiations proved useless. Germany had already all but cut off its international telecommunications traffic on August the 25th, 1939, and on the evening of August the 31st, 1939, Germany cut off its telephone traffic with Poland in order to help it catch the Poles by surprise, although it wasn't a surprise to those Poles who were alert and realistic. The German concentrations of troops were notably heavy along Poland's borders. The fact that Germany had, since March 1939, exercised domination over the former Czechoslovakia, including the puppet state of Slovakia, meant that Germany could attack Poland also from the south. The East Prussian exclave meant that Germany could attack Poland from the north, and of course, Germany, as Poland's western neighbor, could attack Poland from the west. The German army was superior in numbers. It was superior in heavy artillery. It was superior in the number of tanks or armored vehicles. It was superior in the number of military airplanes, especially modern ones. It was also, on average, better trained than the Polish army, despite the fact that Poland had been a military dictatorship since 1926 under the late Marshal Józef Piłsudski. But after Piłsudski's death in May 1935, none of his successors had had the kind of charisma which Marshal Piłsudski had had. And Poland had tried to somehow maneuver between Germany in the west and the Soviet Union in the east as a so-called middle power, the largest one of the medium-sized countries, medium and small-sized countries between the Baltic Sea in the north and the Black Sea or the Mediterranean Sea in the south. The Polish army's chiefs of staff were also divided on whether to try to defend Poland's long and winding western borders, or on whether to establish defensive bases along the Vistula or Wisła and San rivers in what was then central Poland and partly eastern Poland, and then the so-called Romanian bridgehead, because due to Poland's larger size between the First and Second World Wars, it had a short boundary with Romania in the extreme southeast. The so-called Plan Zachód or Plan West, which obliged the Polish armed forces to attempt to defend the country's western regions, won a majority in the Polish army's headquarters, and therefore this was attempted with only a limited success. While Poland did win several minor battles, Germany won all the major battles, including the Battle of the Bzura River in northern Poland from September the 9th to 19th, 1939. In that battle, Poland initially had several days of success when it was able to halt or at least significantly slow down the German armed forces' advance on Warsaw, Poland's capital, whose western outskirts had already been reached on September the 8th or 9th, so just 7 or 8 days after the invasion had started. However, by mid-September 1979, the tide had turned, the Germans had about twice as many soldiers, they had many more armored vehicles, and many more modern military airplanes to assist them. The Poles had to start to retreat, and only in the end, a few thousand of the some 225,000 soldiers who had begun the battle as an invasion of one of the German invading armies under General, and they had been led by General Tadeusz Kutrszeba. Only a few thousand of them were able to escape both death, wounding, and captivity, and were able to continue their retreat towards Warsaw. During the later stages of the Battle of the Bzura River, on September the 17th, 1939, the Soviet Union had invaded Poland from the east. The already beleaguered Polish Army's commander, Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły, or Śmigły-Rydz, had told the Polish Army's units in eastern Poland not to resist the Soviets in order to spare their bullets and men. However, not all Polish leaders or Polish soldiers in eastern Poland followed Marshal Rydz-Śmigły's advice, and there were several battles even in eastern Poland, while Poland was able to score tactical victories in a couple of them. Also, eastern Poland was occupied. However, thousands of Polish soldiers remained at large by the end of the September campaign, which meant that they were able to either join the resistance or the underground anti-Nazi and anti-Soviet movements, and Poland indeed had continental Europe's largest resistance movement, or they were able to then escape through the still officially neutral Romania all the way to France and eventually Britain. While Poland's air force was rather small and outdated, its pilots were among the world's best trained, and quite many of these pilots were eventually able to make their way to Britain, where they significantly increased the Royal Air Force's success during the so-called Battle of Britain between July 1940 and the spring of 1941. So let us now look at the invasion of Poland more in detail, or the September campaign. In all, Poland had about 1 million soldiers divided into 39 divisions. 24 of them, however, were mobilized on September the 1st when the invasion began from the west, north, and south. 16 brigades, 4,300 guns, 210 tanks, then 670 small tanks or tankettes, and 400 military airplanes. Poland still had a rather large contingent of cavalry men who rode on horseback. However, they had been trained to fight also on foot. And contrary to one of the most common myths about the Polish attempt at defending the country from the German invaders, only on a few occasions did Polish cavalrymen appear to attack the German tanks or armored vehicles, and that was in order to escape encirclement. The myth started from the Battle of Krojanty, which took place already on the invasion's first day, September the 1st, 1939, when at the first a unit of Polish cavalrymen had spotted German infantry soldiers or foot soldiers and had attacked and dispersed them, and then from the cover of forests or forest, a unit of German armored vehicles had come, and then these Polish cavalry men had retreated from the battlefield as quickly as possible. However, when an Italian reporter, either later on the same day or on the following day, saw these bodies of Polish cavalry men and horses, then he was told by one of the Germans present that supposedly these Polish cavalrymen and soldiers had died trying to attack the German armored vehicles. While he tried to present the story as an example of the Polish valor or bravery, it was turned into an example of the alleged Polish foolhardiness and outdated military tactics. Germany mobilized 66 divisions to attack Poland. It had 6 brigades, 9,000 guns, 2,750 tanks, and 2,315 airplanes. Slovakia, which simply wanted to conquer a portion of southern Poland, fielded 3 divisions. The Soviet Union fielded at least 33 divisions, at least 11 brigades, 4,959 guns, 4,736 tanks, and 3,300 airplanes. So in all, the 1 million or so Polish soldiers were facing 1.5 million Germans, 466,516 Soviets, and 51,306 Slovaks. However, it was no easy parade walk or parade march into Poland, contrary to what most of the Nazi German propaganda films claimed. Germany suffered relatively heavy losses given its material and numerical superiority and the fact that it had been able to catch at least a major portion of the Polish defenders somewhat by surprise. 16,343 German soldiers were killed, 3,500 were missing in action, 30,300 were wounded. So Germany suffered, in terms of the number of soldiers killed, missing, and wounded, some 50,000 casualties. 236 German tanks were destroyed, 800 German military vehicles were destroyed, and despite the German Air Force's mechanical and numerical superiority over the Polish Air Force, 246 German airplanes were destroyed. By contrast, 66,000 Polish soldiers were killed, 133,700 were wounded, between 660,000 and 690,000 were captured, 132 tanks and armored cars were destroyed, and 327 aircraft were destroyed. Slovakia suffered light casualties, 37 killed, 11 missing, 114 wounded, and 2 aircraft destroyed. The Soviet casualties were heavier. Either 1,475 were killed or missing, and 2,383 were wounded, or a total of 5,327 were killed, missing, or wounded, and 43 tanks were destroyed. As the German army advanced into Poland, the Polish forces withdrew from their forward bases of operation close to the Polish-German border to more established defense lines to the east. After the Battle of the Bzura ended in Polish defeat in the 3rd week of September 1939, the Germans gained an undisputed advantage. Polish forces then withdrew to the southeast, where they prepared for a long defense of the Romanian bridgehead and awaited expected support and relief from France and the United Kingdom, which never, unfortunately, came on time. On October the 6th, 1939, 5 weeks after the invasion had begun, Following the Polish defeat at the Battle of Kotsk, German and Soviet forces gained full official control over Poland. On October the 8th, Germany directly annexed Western Poland and the former free city of Danzig, and placed the remaining block of territory on its side of Poland under the administration of the newly established general government, while the Soviet Union directly annexed Eastern Poland, the eastern parts of Belarus or Bielorussia, meaning White Russia, and the western parts of Bielorussia or Belarus, meaning White Russia, and of the Ukraine. In the aftermath of the invasion, a collective of underground resistance organizations formed the Polish underground state within the former Poland's territory. Many of the military exiles who managed to escape Poland subsequently joined the Polish armed forces in the West, an armed force loyal to the Polish government in exile. Hitler had at first pursued a policy of rapprochement, or getting closer with Poland, trying to improve opinion in Germany, and had signed the non-aggression pact of 1934 with Poland. Hitler had tried to weaken ties between Poland and France and had attempted to maneuver Poland into the anti-Comintern pact, which was aimed against the Soviet Union and the International Organization of Communist Parties. Poland had been promised, at least nominally, more territory in the Ukraine and Belarus if it agreed to invade the Soviet Union with Germany. However, they would have had to agree to surrender their special rights in the free city of Danzig, and then Danzig would have been reincorporated into Germany. Besides, they would have had to agree to let the German workers build the highway and exterritorial highway and railway through the Polish corridor into East Prussia. Poland had gained a tiny piece of the doomed Czechoslovakia, Český Těšín or Těšin, as a result of the Munich Agreement, which had been signed on September the 30th, 1938. This region had a Polish majority. However, Poland had refused either to let Germany re-annex the free city of Danzig or to build those exterritorial traffic routes, meaning highway and railway, through the Polish corridor into East Germany. On March the 31st, 1939, Poland had formed a military alliance with Britain and France, believing that Polish independence and territorial integrity would be defended with their support if Germany was to invade the country. And Britain and France had issued guarantees to that effect. However, in practice, they did not keep their promises. On the other hand, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who followed the policy of appeasement, in other words, trying to please Hitler's Nazi Germany by granting it territorial and other concessions in order to preserve peace, especially in Europe. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and his Foreign Secretary or Foreign Minister Lord Halifax still hoped to strike a deal with Hitler regarding Danzig, and possibly the Polish corridor. Privately, Hitler had said in May 1939 that he was not so keen about re-annexing Danzig, but rather of gaining much territory in Eastern Europe as living space or Lebensraum for the allegedly superior German Aryan race. With tensions mounting between Germany and Poland, and by extension between Germany, Britain, and France, on April the 28th, 1939, Hitler unilaterally renounced the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact of 1934 and the London Naval Agreement of 1935. Months passed without diplomatic interaction between Germany and Poland. France and Britain, in the interval, tried to secure a military alliance with the Soviet Union against Germany, but that foundered on Poland's flat refusal to allow any Soviet troops inside its eastern territory, even for allegedly defensive purposes, because the Polish government was afraid of the Soviet Union trying to annex large parts of eastern Poland, a fear which proved well-founded. In early May 1939, Foreign Minister Józef Beck addressed the Polish parliament's lower house the same, proclaiming at the same time Poland's desire to try to resolve its disputes, especially with Germany, peacefully, but also its determination to defend itself should it be attacked. Also in May 1939, Hitler made it clear that in the near future, in some months, Poland would be invaded and that there would be much heavier military casualties than in the largely bloodless occupation of Czechoslovakia. On August the 22nd, 1939, just 10 days before the invasion began, Hitler spoke to his military commanders at the Ober-Salzberg. The object of the war is physically to destroy the enemy. That is why I have prepared for the moment only in the east my death's head formations, with orders to kill without pity or mercy all men, women, and children of Polish descent or language. Only in this way can we obtain the living space we need. In other words, he was telling his generals that there would have to be a genocide of Poles, and indeed Poles did suffer among the ethnic groups of Europe one of the highest casualties. Of course, those casualties paled in comparison with Europe's Jewish population, some 85% of which was killed during the Holocaust. Or anyway, a great majority was killed. In the secret protocol to the German-Soviet non-aggression treaty of August the 23rd, 1939, Eastern Europe and the Baltic countries and Finland were divided into spheres of influence. Originally, the German sphere of influence was to consist of Western Poland, and Lithuania. After Poland had been partitioned, also Lithuania moved into the Soviet sphere of influence. So the Soviet sphere of influence ended up consisting of Bessarabia, a large province in northeastern Romania. Now it is largely contained in the Republic of Moldova, and it may still be partly located in the Ukraine. And then, of course, Eastern Poland, then Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. And accordingly, the Soviet Union would then force Estonia in the last week of September 1939 into a friendship and mutual assistance treaty, and to allow, therefore, thousands of Soviet soldiers into Estonia's military bases. The same coercive tactic was used with the threats of invasion and occupation to make Latvia surrender in the first week of October and Lithuania in the second week of October. Finland entered in the second week of October. Several weeks of ultimately unsuccessful negotiations, or some weeks of ultimately unsuccessful negotiations with the Soviet Union over an exchange of territories, which then ended in the Winter War.
Winter War, mutta nyt me lähdetään katsomaan asuntomessuja lähdepäs mukaan. If it is possible, so come